Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. Black Americans celebrate Ketanji Brown's confirmation to the Supreme Court. Oh yeah, there's parties being held in the streets. There are people who are throwing confetti. There are individuals naming their child after her. No, none of that stuff's actually happening. It's just white media spin. You see, Ketanji Brown, she's not being celebrated by anybody except for white politicians in the White House and the white left. She's a darling of the white left's pet issues. That's why they were so hot and bothered about her. And she's shown not a whit of concern for us. The only concern that the Democrats have where black people are concerned with Ketanji Brown's confirmation is that hopefully this will serve to solidify black female voters, especially come this fall. Because the Democrats have been losing ground with black women, because they haven't done anything for black women, and they need to shore up their support on that front. And what are they doing? They're looking to find out if there's any more mileage left in the grateful Negro strategy. That's what they're trying with black women. Seeing if they can get any more mileage out of the whole grateful Negro thing. The Democrats put a black woman on the Supreme Court, and she's going to promote the interests of the white left, but they're going to demand that black women be grateful for this nothing burger, this non-gesture, even though Democrats aren't going to be doing anything for black women, while Democrats are giving a gift to themselves and claiming that it's for black women. It's like a husband who buys a bowling ball as a gift for his wife, even though he knows that she hates bowling and she has no interest in sports. This is the ethno-political equivalent of that. The white media's entire MO is to control what we think, to dictate to us our own thoughts. And they do this through producing propaganda claiming to speak for us. Well, when you look at this piece of fluff here, who the world are they mentioning as the black people who are celebrating Ketanji Jackson on the Supreme Court? Who are they mentioning in these yellow journalism pieces? The usual suspects, the cherry-picked bootlick, sellout, social climbing political whores who depend on white power for a paycheck. They're certainly not talking to the black street, because the black street's going to be saying, what about what we're going to get? And I found it to be perversely ironic, just like everything else about white supremacy is perversely ironic, that you got these white politicians talking about Ketanji Brown and dark money. First of all, there's not one black organization or even black person who is responsible for any of the so-called dark money that the white media and the politicians talk about. What they ought to call it is pale money, because that's what it really is. White special interests and white wealthy individuals who use all kinds of front groups and organizations to conceal their involvement. And someone explained to me exactly why I should be getting happy about Ketanji being put on the Supreme Court. Remember, as Neely Fuller said, white supremacy believes in taking both sides of the conversation. If Ketanji gets confirmed, then what will happen is white power will have their own cherry-picked bootlick heifer on the Supreme Court who's going to affirm white supremacy's interests. And if she fails to get nominated, then they will declare that, well, this is the problem with trying to put black people in some position or wherever, because everybody hates black people. It's because she's black and everyone hates black people. So heads, they win. Tails, black people lose. They put their puppet on the bench, and they're claiming that black people are all in favor of it, and they're examples of black people who are cheering this. Barack and Michelle Obama. Laura Coates, you know her, she's one of the empty talking heads on CNN, and a few other political operatives, black bootlicks who suck up to the white left. The same pitiful menagerie of fakers, frauds, phonies, and fools. We didn't choose this woman. We had no control whatsoever over her being put on the Supreme Court. We didn't have a chance to ask her any questions or vet her on anything. So why would black people be getting happy about her simply because she's black? Well, hell, in that case, then why should we not be unhappy about Clarence Thomas using that logic? And before you say that there's no way that we could do that, compare that with how white power operates. Now, you've probably heard me mention the organization called the Federalist Society. What they are is a group of right-wing zealots in the legal profession who promote many conservative causes, but one of the main things they've done is to spearhead and push the Republicans' hyper-obsession with stuffing the federal courts with as many right-wing extremists as they can. As the Federalist Society sees it, the GOP's decision to make itself the white man's party has backfired due to the country's demographic shifting, with whites becoming a minority. Until now, the blatant racism in the laws and judiciary was always justified with the feeble lie that, well, white people are the majority and it's the greatest good for the greatest number. Well, in a country where whites are a minority, not only is that lie no longer tenable, but worse, that lie will justify whites being marginalized. They've come up with an argument that justifies their own marginalization. This is the scenario that they're looking at. They're staring down the barrel of this, and they're the ones who set it up themselves. For decades, they've known that sooner or later, the legislatures and other lawmaking bodies will no longer be able to be tenable as rubber stamps for white power. They're going to tilt in the direction of the people, and that being the case, they're not going to be useful. Mostly because the grassroots are going to render them ineffective. That's how that's actually going to play out. So how does a ruling minority exercise power if they're no longer in a position to write the laws? Well, as the old lawyer saying goes, it's more important to know the judge than it is to know the law. And federal judgeships are lifetime appointments. From there, the right-wing zealots can simply declare any law they don't like to be unconstitutional, legislating from the bench. These guys have made it clear that they're going to be deciding court cases strictly based on whatever is expedient to the interest of white power. Now, there are laws against politicians vetting court nominees themselves. That kind of thing could be seen as political high-handedness, which is a crime. That's where the Federalist Society comes in. They started off as a group of right-wing law students decades back on college and university campuses who wanted to make their schools more conservative. So what these right-wing law students would do is they would invite right-wing lawyers to come speak at their college or university. Predictably, they quickly gained the attention and support of rich white donors, and they've now become a nationwide network of right-wing lawyers whose members and fellow travelers have become judges, members of Congress, and Supreme Court justices. The Federalist Society is the group who the GOP has relied on for decades now to vet federal court nominees, and who Republican presidents rely on for recommendations to the federal bench. The Federalist Society makes it their business to determine which nominees are politically reliable. Now, some of you may recall Harriet Miers, who W tried to nominate to the Supreme Court way back when. Now, as much of a racist whack job as W was, you would think that right-wing nuts would be satisfied with his pick. But, as you'll remember, it was those same right-wing zealots like Bill Kristol who lost their minds when Harriet Miers' name was put into consideration, and they demanded that Bush remove her from all consideration for the Supreme Court, which, of course, he did. So, what was the problem then? The problem was that the Federalist Society never got a chance to get their hooks into her. She was not someone who they had chosen or vetted. They didn't know if she was going to be a solid pick or if she would eventually break bad on them. See, the Federalist Society doesn't believe in taking chances. It doesn't matter how solid you may seem on the surface. And there's good reason for the Federalist Society being so reticent to support her. Before the Federalist Society, Republican presidents would choose their Supreme Court picks based on what part of the country the nominee came from and other incidental factors. But the problem was that in many cases, once these people got confirmed to the Supreme Court, they would begin to rule on cases in ways that the Republicans didn't like. They would start to drift to the left. You see, Washington, D.C. happens to be its own little country almost, and that being the case, judicial picks, Supreme Court picks, the justices and judges there, they all have their own private little social circles and such. And a lot of those GO-picked Supreme Court justices would eventually fall in line with the more liberal Georgetown law set, and also the kind of people who would be writing for law journals and such. This persistent breaking bad by GOP judicial picks was pretty much the main reason the Federalist Society became so popular with the Republican Party. They demand tools who will ignore the law and simply legislate right-wing ideology from the bench. The most blatant example of this that I can think of is Shelby v. Holder. That was the landmark case where the right-wing Supreme Court struck down the pre-clearance provision of the 1965 Voting Rights Act. That's the part of the Voting Rights Act that required the states, particularly the old Confederate states, to have to get federal approval before they could make any changes to their voting laws. This is important because the Constitution allows the states to set their own standards as to who is allowed to vote. Well, one of the GOP's pet projects has been to get rid of that particular provision of federal law, and that's what Shelby v. Holder was all about. After Obama was elected, the right-wing nuts lost what few brain cells they had, and they launched an all-out jihad to repeal the 15th Amendment. And it was the now deceased racist scumbag Antonin Scalia, who I'm sure is roasting in hell right now, who in his infamous ruling said that he wanted the 1965 Voting Rights Act to be struck down precisely because the citizens would never do it, and the politicians were too afraid of voter backlash to do it themselves. Go read Antonin Scalia's decision in that case. That's what he said. He said, why, even the very name of the law makes it where politicians would be scared to do anything, so since they won't, we've got to. Talk about saying the quiet part out loud. This is the literal definition of political high-handedness. It is not the job of judges to try to insulate politicians from punishment at the polls. It's not the judge's job to save the politicians' jobs. And when the people are united behind a policy, isn't that supposed to be democracy? So much for states' rights, huh? And for the record, Antonin Scalia had been one of the first right-wing lawyers who the Federalist Society invited to come speak at their campus gatherings back in 1982. Scalia was a law professor at the University of Chicago at the time, but his ardent support for the Federalist Society and his frequent speaking at their events assured them that he was the kind of white supremacist zealot that they needed on the bench. This is what the GOP is about, for the brain-dead morons who come bombing into my comments section saying that we ought to back the GOP, as if they're somehow any less racist than the Democrats, when they're not. See, when the right-wing nuts get happy about someone being nominated to the bench, it's because they've already vetted them. They don't get happy about Kavanaugh or Gorsuch or Alito or Scalia simply because they're white. They get happy because they chose these people, they selected them, they personally vetted them, and they know they can depend on these lunatics to ignore the law and promote white power. Now, while the white media is telling you and me that we ought to get happy about Ketanji being on the bench due to nothing more than cosmetics from a woman who has not and isn't going to do anything for black people, the white right, on the other hand, they only get happy about a nominee if they know they're going to get something out of them, and they don't leave it to chance. The Federalist Society wants assurances to how their nominees are going to rule on court cases. They don't settle for vague impressions or wishful thinking. So if you're one of the chumps listening to this who's trying to claim that Ketanji being confirmed is some kind of win, all you're doing is setting yourself and black people up for some supreme disappointment. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors: Detroit Beauty Supply, Quasi, Wesley Monroe, Aisha Sarpong, and Nigel Davis. Salute to them, and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.